I would like to call the school board meeting for March 5th, 2019 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Ms. Bradley?
Here.
Ms. Langford?
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn?
Here.
Ms. Delgardelle Shelley?
Here.
The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Second. Okay.
Want to take Dwana?
Yeah.
Dwana as second. Motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, second by Ms. Bradley. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for February 19th, 2019. May I have a motion and a second to approve minutes?
I move approval.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Next, we have district recognitions, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Ahart.
Good evening, board. It's nice that we're having a little warming phase in the weather. I actually reached the teens. We are all probably familiar with the old expression, it takes a village to raise a child. And I suppose we could amend that to say it also takes a county. Polk County, along with Prairie Meadows, have been great partners to Des Moines Public Schools over the past several years, supporting a range of special projects and programs, both district-wide and at several of our individual school buildings. Recently, the funding they have provided has gone toward improvements to the district's technology infrastructure. Currently, these funds are helping to purchase and install backup generators at our major network hubs. While that might not sound like the most glamorous of projects, it is critical to ensuring access to a secure and reliable technology network for our students and teachers, and a network, I will say, that we've become increasingly reliant upon. It is my pleasure now to welcome to the podium our special guests from Polk County and Prairie Meadows for what I'm sure will be another generous recognition. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a whole passel, so I'm not going to try to name everybody individually. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Gary Palmer from Prairie Meadows. And with me, I have Brad Rhines, our Senior Vice President, Ann Atkins, Senior Vice President, and Julie Stewart, our Director of Community Relations.
Hi, School Board. Angela Connolly, Polk County Supervisor, and I have my colleague, Matt McCoy. Matt? Morning. I'm sure Gary wants to talk also, but, you know, we've been doing this skit for a long time, and I think it comes where you're going to need it the most. I am sorry that I've heard some news that you're short a little bit in your budget, and I know you're going to be struggling and trying to make some tough decisions. So I hope, as Tom mentioned, that this comes at an opportune time. I know it's not ever going to be enough, but I wish you the best of luck, and I know you're struggling to get where you need to be, and you guys do a great job, and I wish we could do more. But I hope this helps, and all the partnerships that we've had, you know, we really have a great partnership with the Des Moines Public Schools. All through the years, we've given through the libraries, through the playgrounds, we've put trails in at the schools, and it continues to do great work with Polk County. So as Tom said, it really does take a village, and Polk County is glad that we can participate in all the great programs that you provide. So thanks for everything that you do for our kids and for our community. Matt, you want to say anything? Okay, Gary?
You know, you have a tough job. I used to serve on the school board in Bondurant, in a lot smaller district, but I just told Julie when we got here, that was the toughest 6 years I ever put in. It's a lot of responsibility and a lot to do, especially in a district this big. But we at Prairie Meadows, again, you know, we have a great partner in Polk County. We've been partners now for over 30 years. We've given back to this community over $1.8 billion in profits. And we're glad to be able to present a check today for $513,408.40. And we hope we can do this forever and ever. We're very happy stewards of this community to work with the city of Des Moines, with the school board, and so many other organizations through this great partnership we have with the County Board of Supervisors. So We're glad to be able to bring this. They will, you can cash them. They'll work, believe me. They better anyway. But thank you for what you do, and we're appreciative of being a partner of all of you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Just you, just the chairs?
Yeah, Tom.
You better hold a real one, too.
Closer. Closer.
Tight.
Thank you.
One more.
Keep it up, please.
Thanks, everybody.
Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll take these.
The next item on the agenda is the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information desk to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determination as deemed necessary. Who has the consent motion? Ms. Caldwell-Johnson.
The board consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $7,417,048.76.
Is there a second? Motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, second by Ms. Delagardelle-Shelley. Is there any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next, we have a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E1, public hearing for utility easement agreement at McCombs Middle School? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board approve granting a permanent utility easement for electrical service to Polk County for a communication tower following a public meeting.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, second by Ms. Langford. No presentation. Any questions? Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next, another public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E2, public hearing for a walk-in cooler addition at Greenwood Elementary School? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Studio Melee for a walk-in cooler addition to Greenwood Elementary School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
I move approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Barron, second by Ms. Bradley. Any questions or discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next, another public hearing. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E3, public hearing for upgrades to the art rooms at Hoover High School? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by RDG for upgrades to the art rooms at Hoover High School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
Move a
Second?
Motion by Ms. Delgardelle Shelley, second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Any questions or discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Another public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E4, public hearing, East High School pool, ADA locker room, and HVAC upgrades? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Alvine Engineering for an ADA locker room and HVAC upgrades to the pool at East High School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
and move approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Barron, second by Ms. Delgardelle Shelley. No presentation. Any questions or discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next item on the agenda is item F1, open enrollment late applications for denial. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
Yes, this evening we have one late application for denial per state code. Students are allowed to apply for open enrollment out of district, and there's a specified timeline for that. Under special circumstances, an open enrollment out application may be approved that's not timely if they meet certain specifications. Those on the board, the one on the board agenda tonight is one that did not meet the standard for good cause exception.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment late application listed on item F1?
So move.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson, second by Ms. Langford. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next item on our agenda is item F2, award of contract for Greenwood, Morris, and Riverwoods Elementary Schools walk-in cooler freezer projects. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, what we have here tonight are three different proposals for similar type work. The reason this is not on consent, as it normally would be, was due to just a little bit of a timing snafu. So under public hearings this evening, we had the Greenwood project public hearing. The other two public hearings had occurred at a previous meeting. So pretty standard fare projects at each of these places.
Thank you. May I have a motion and a second to approve F2, award of contract for Greenwood, Morris, and Riverwood Elementary Schools walk-in cooler freezer projects? Okay, motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson, second by Ms. Langford. Any discussion or does anyone have any questions?
I just have a question because I'm curious. I've never asked this before. When it says alt number 1, what does that mean in the table?
I'm sorry.
Right here.
The alternate number 1 that's like a
Oh yeah,
significantly less.
there are different options within the plans, and they can bid the basic plan and then add additional costs for certain alternates
Oh, okay.
that are on
Perfect.
there.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next item on our agenda is item F3, monitoring report for Algebra 1, Part 1. And this is a discussion item, and a final report for action comes later. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Ahart to introduce our presenters.
Yes, welcome. So we have our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, Noel Tickey, our secondary Director of Teaching and Learning, Sarah Doherty, and our brand new, not brand new anymore, I'm sure it's felt like years already, but of secondary mathematics, Courtney Wallstrom, who has just been a fantastic addition to our team. So I will turn it over to them for the
Great.
first of the two-part Algebra 1 monitoring report.
Thank you. We're going to start this evening by highlighting some of the key performance indicators and supporting data for this report. On our first page, under key performance indicator, we're noting under percent of students at or above NWA MAP college and career readiness for fall. We saw a decline in 8th grade, but an increase in 9th grade. And our grade distribution for Algebra 1 showed a slight, but perhaps insignificant increase. For our next data point, percent of students progressing on track for college and career readiness on Math Map. This is for 8th graders. We're celebrating a significant increase in the performance of our ELL students, and we surmise that we're serving students with fewer needs, with stronger language skills amongst that population. We have two real areas of concern, a decrease in our Asian students and all students overall. Next, we have percent of students progressing or on track for college and career readiness in the Math Map for 9th graders. Two celebration areas there, both significant increases in percentage for our Asian students and our students receiving ELL services. All student groups showed growth, but our area of concern is the smallest amount of growth, and that was for our African American students. Next is our grade distribution for Algebra 1 Semester 1, and these are high school students. We had some real celebrations around our multiracial students, our students receiving ELL services, and our students receiving special education services. And two areas of decline there were for white students and insignificant growth for African American students, or increase, excuse me. And finally, we have percent of 8th grade students meeting or exceeding Math Map fall to winter projected growth. Noting here that greater than 60% would indicate we're closing gaps for students. We did not have any student groups quite meeting that figure. However, we're keeping pace with the national norm.
So as we think about these numbers and kind of what they mean, I think back to the shifts in the core. So we spent years and years as a nation teaching kids how to do math. That's how most of you were taught math. That's how I was taught math. And really the core standards are intended not just to teach kids how to do math, but really that they understand it, that they're making sense of it, because it turns out you can do it if you understand it, and then apply it. So actually use that math. And so this fall, and you can see the shifts in the core there on the screen. Focus, where the standards focus, coherence, so linking those topics together, and then really digging into that rigor piece. And so this fall, when stepping into a new role, meeting with middle school math teachers, we were really digging into that rigor piece, digging into building that conceptual understanding and pushing kids to really make sense of it. And I heard again and again from teachers, we don't have time. There's so much content that we're trying to get through that we don't feel like we can teach at this level of depth. And that surprised me, because when I read back in the district math vision that we created, the district had provided to the teachers, like, these are the areas that you should focus on. These are the prioritized standards. But that hadn't really translated into our teaching, because the teachers didn't know how. They were still trying to teach. They're still trying to teach all 40 sixth grade math standards at the same level of depth. And they're frustrated, and they're trying to do as much as they possibly can, and they're working really hard, but they feel like they're dragging kids along at a pace that's just too fast. So we've taken a little bit of a step back. I recognized, okay, we need to step back and go back to that first piece of focus. And so in February, teams of teachers, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, all sat down and looked at those prioritized standards and evaluated our current reality. What are the things we're spending too much time on right now? And what are the things that we need to spend more time on? These focus documents identify those standards that we should be spending 65 to 85% of our time on. And so that was something that they looked at, but then in conjunction with that, they also identified where are some overlaps or some connections that we can make for students. So for example, in 6th grade, we have to teach kids how to multiply decimals. We also have to teach kids how to find the area of a surface. I can do those two things at the same time. I also can probably make finding the area of a surface a little more relevant to students, also making multiplying decimals a little more relevant. So looking for those connection points for students so that they can connect, I'm learning this standard, and I can learn them at the same time. I think that's a really key piece for our that was kind of like a light bulb moment for some of our teachers to realize we can address some of these things and gain some efficiencies. The whole point in gaining those efficiencies is so that we can teach at that depth. So going back to that rigor piece, and really we can break rigor in math down to these 3 areas: conceptual understanding, that making sense part, procedural skills and fluency. That's something that as a nation we have spent a lot of time on, and then the application piece. When I look at these, what really resonates with me is when I think about when I'm trying to build relationships with the students in my classroom, it's a lot easier to do that when I'm asking them to make sense of math, when I'm encouraging them to think about like, oh, I wonder what would happen if I do this, or how do these numbers relate to each other? Also with application, it provides students the opportunities to bring their own intuitions, their own experiences, and actually use the math. Not like a word problem where we're finding where 2 trains intersect, but actually useful math, where they're actually thinking about how this applies.
I thought we discontinued that train problem.
Oh, it's still there.
I'm not sure that that's ever gonna die in certain circles. So I really see those 2 areas, the conceptual understanding and the application, as ways for us to like make those connections for kids and for them to then have more meaning in the procedural. Like I can do the procedural because I understand it. In reaching, I'm gonna go back to this. In talking to teachers, one of the things that they have voiced to me is like, I'm not sure that I really have that understanding myself. We have some teachers that's not how they learned math. Like they're really good at doing math, but actually building that conceptual understanding, that's not how they learned it, and it's not how they were taught to teach it. And so that signals for me like a learning opportunity that our teachers can be empowered to empower their students to make sense of it. Obviously, we recognize that Algebra 1 isn't a 6-8 issue. It's not a grade 9 issue. It's really a K-8 issue. And so when we look at our approach, K-5, I would say that they're a little bit ahead in terms of prioritization. Those pacing guides have been adjusted. Those teachers are focusing on those algebra ready standards. Those are the only things that they're reporting on at this point. Also, Project Task is an initiative that started last year where they're teaching they had 90 teachers last year that they were really training on developing those conceptual rich math tasks, and 90 more teachers this year. Numbers sense routines is something that the curriculum team has gone into buildings and done some professional development in certain buildings, working with teachers on how do you help students, quick routines that you can use to help students kind of make sense of numbers and gain that kind of foundational knowledge that they'll need all the way through. I hear high school teachers complaining that kids don't have number sense. So really laying that solid foundation for them. And we've seen some really promising numbers in the buildings that they've gone in and done that professional development in their winter map growth. Those students grew a lot in those buildings where they did that training. So obviously, I think they're looking at how do we extend that then to other buildings. And then they'll also be doing some summer professional development opportunities for teachers this summer. For 6-9, as I mentioned, we've already started that process of narrowing the focus this spring. I expect that teacher leader groups will continue that work and finalize those curriculum redesigns and start to analyze resources. And that's something we'll come back to in just a minute, but I think it's key that we focus on teachers having the resources that they need. This summer, I am planning some professional development opportunities for teachers as well who have voiced, this is what I need, and so responding to that. And then next school year, there are kind of two different approaches. At the high school level, through the TLC work, every building, each Algebra 1 department, or each Algebra 1 PLC will have a leader, a teacher leader. And so I will have a monthly opportunity to touch base with them as they implement these curriculum redesigns. And then for middle school teachers, we plan on providing additional support after contract paid for them. In terms of curriculum resources, we really live in an exciting time where there are lots of resources out there, but I don't know how feasible it is for teachers to sift through all of those and find the ones that are the best. And so that's something that we really want to do in teacher leader teams, is analyze those and make sure that they're aligned to those shifts in the core. One example that I'll give is Algebra 1. There's a curriculum resource out there that I've seen that I'm really interested in providing for my teachers, that the very first unit talks about statistics. And the students actually, at the very beginning of the year, they develop a statistical question so that they can get to know their classmates and then learn how to analyze that data that comes from that. And what I love about that is it sets the tone right off the bat that every student has a place in this room to contribute meaningfully. Because I think so often we isolate students in math, like you either get the procedures or you don't, and we don't give that entry point that you can contribute, you can come up with a question that interests you to find out about your classmates, and building that culture within the classroom. That to me feels like a much more exciting Algebra 1 classroom to lay the foundation for the whole rest of the year. So with that, I would open it up for questions.
Could you repeat your name again and your new role with the district?
Yes, I'm Courtney Wallstrom, Secondary Math Curriculum Coordinator.
So what does that mean?
I am learning all of the things that means.
Fair.
So each content area has a point of contact curriculum coordinator. So what they're primarily responsible for is, first of all, and not simply, is the written curriculum. How does that look across the district? Calibration across schools, implementation of standards. It also includes actual curriculum design and enacted curriculum, so support for how it goes from the paper to actually reaching students, which would also include instructional material support, coaching on the ground with teachers. We do a lot of work with school leadership as well. And then, of course, also the piece of professional learning, designing content-specific professional learning for teachers. So in mathematics and ELA, English Language Arts, we're fortunate to have an elementary person and a secondary person, because those are two pretty different skill sets. And so Courtney serves our secondary specifically, which would be 612 currently.
Awesome. Thank you, and thank you. To hear about students, I was that student that fell off. I remember the year that math got hard for me. It was 7th grade. And I always struggled with I don't understand, why are we doing this? And it didn't make sense, right? So to hear about learning happening where kids are actually understanding how the math makes sense, that's really exciting. I was wondering, in terms of our schools for rigor, where we're at currently. How many schools do we have who are schools for rigor? Where are we at in that phase?
Total in cohort 1, we had 6 in our demo schools. Cohort 2, we have 16.
Including the original 6?
No.
No,
So that's 16
an additional. And cohort 3, we have 6 or
Well,
7, sorry.
7, because we count.
IB.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, in terms of if we saw large differences in terms of how our students were performing, whether they were in a school of rigor
Yeah.
or not, if we just saw general trends.
Yes. We have that data, actually.
We have the data. There were some places where I saw positives and some where I didn't. Like it just, not enough that I felt like I could draw like we actually had a slide in there and then we took it out because I felt like I don't feel like I can draw a straight line to that.
I will be sharing some data later on that compares the first 6 schools for rigor with everybody else, and there's a very clear distinction.
And it also,
Positive
in
relationship.
high school, gets a little tricky
Because we have one school.
because we only,
Which is north, right?
Yeah.
so it identifies the schools, and so we wanted to avoid that.
The
Oh,
good news,
sorry. And then
No,
I identified the school. Sorry.
I think the good news is future thinking that the kind of student experiences that Courtney has outlined and really know that teachers want to provide also require teachers and students to get better at the things that teachers are learning in our schools for rigor schools, like teaming and working together. And so the nice thing is, as Courtney works on this, we're sort of getting them ready for presenting a need for more ambitious instructional strategies to make the curriculum as written more meaningful through better instruction.
And I would say as well, some of this for me boiled up from working with doing a training around schools for rigor for my teachers and recognizing that they're trying to have a teaming strategy, which comes from the schools for rigor around like a worksheet about solving equations. So it's, this strategy is awesome, but only if we're doing it around something that's meaningful. And so helping my math teachers make that connection, I think will be really important for them.
Okay. So we did see there's a difference between clearly, as schools are coming in learning the model, right? There are different places of progression. Tom, you're saying that among our first cohort of schools, we're seeing some different distinctions between the other two regarding math or
Regarding math and reading, yeah.
okay.
And at the high school level, again, we don't want to identify individual schools, but the other thing that's really important to note about those 6 schools, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is 4 of those 6 original schools are Title I schools, and they're still, really knocking it out of the park. So in mathematics, however, while they had really positive growth at North, it didn't exceed the growth at the other high schools collectively, and that's only at 9th grade on the map assessment.
It's a very small data
So
set,
it's a real small data
why
set
we
that you
were
can't really draw
hesitant to
very
draw
many
any
conclusions
major.
from.
And that's okay. I just want the honest picture of where we were at.
Yeah.
Can I
In
just
regards to that.
Can I just ask a quick question in relationship to that? So when we're talking about schools for rigor and the difference there, is there a distinction then? I'm trying to understand between what you're talking about with the ability, the teaching strategies and the focus. Is there a difference already with the teachers, or does that still cut across all teachers regardless of if they're in a school for rigor or not?
As
Does
far
my
as the
question
demonstrated need
Um,
for support.
Yes, and for what you're doing around, I'm sorry, I lost the.
Course redesign and curriculum
Yeah.
redesign.
of course,
So everything
and-
that Courtney outlined is what we're doing for everyone.
Right, so that's why I was that's what I was trying to figure out is the relationship of the schools for rigor to what you're doing, because I would assume that's a district-wide thing regardless of what
Yes.
school you're in.
Yes. I just think it would help those schools for rigor teachers who have these great strategies be able to apply it even more. They're somewhat restricted right now with what they're trying to do it around in the Algebra 1 content.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. To that point, I really appreciated hearing the experience. It's clear that you're connected to the teachers that you're working with and kind of their frustrations and where they're at. I'm wondering if you're seeing a difference in the needs for your teachers who are at the schools for rigor versus our other our other buildings? Is there a difference in terms of what they're needing or frustrated about or hopeful about?
I would say my teachers who are in the Schools for Rigor schools maybe are more aware of their need because they are trying out these strategies and they're falling flat at times. Like they feel like it's not as effective as they wanted or hoped it would be when they plan this lesson and they want these kids to talk and they want them to interact, and they're just not getting that same response out of the kids that they want.
Yeah.
So I think there's an awareness that we need more in terms of the content that we're providing to kids from those teachers.
Got it.
And what we're finding with the Schools for Rigor was never about building teachers' content knowledge. It was about good instructional strategies that cut across, regardless of content area. So what we're finding is through our implementation of Schools for Rigor, we still have significant needs for building teachers' content knowledge around this new way of doing math. Because the standards have changed. It's very different across the board. All of our content areas, what we were asked to do as high schoolers is very different than what our current high schools are being asked. So we can't negate the needs of the adults as well. We can't assume, and I made some faulty assumptions that teachers were prepared to teach in this new way around math specifically to then apply it to their new pedagogy around Schools for Rigor. And we're having to fill some gaps.
Awesome. Two final questions, and then I'm done. The second is in regards to our African American students, right? We still see the lowest gain there. I know there were some, in past reports we've talked about like summer programming that was targeted specifically to students of color. I'm just wondering, in terms of our equity work, how does that intersect with our math vision and our plan?
So the summer programming is still continuing. That will still happen this summer. We will still be recruiting students for that. And that is really to get students accelerated who haven't been identified to be able to take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. So it's to get them on that path that they maybe missed out on originally. So that is certainly an avenue for us to reach out to our students of color and get them the support and services that they need. Maybe they have those skills and just weren't identified for whatever reason. I would also say that I believe very passionately that when we provide opportunities for every kid to really have those access points for instruction, so conceptual understanding and application, again, using students' own intuition that they have or experiences that they have, instead of me as the teacher directing what that's going to look like. To me, that is a very effective way for me to reach out to my students who maybe haven't felt a place in the classroom previously.
We also were here for the Males of Color report and talking a little bit about, like, for instance, our CRAVE redesign and how in our English and social studies classes, we can tap into existing materials that are more representative of our students. In math, it's not a straight line like that. And so what a culturally responsive and proficient classroom looks like in the math classroom is just what Courtney kind of outlined. It's not necessarily finding novels that are representative of our student experiences, but using our students as assets in designing the instruction. And so that's been a place of learning for us. I think, what does it look like to design a curriculum that's not so obvious when math is at the center and not as much as people have been traditionally, and it's about putting people at the center of that curriculum.
Thank you. And then finally, I know in the past we've seen numbers reported around the number of students that we have we're engaging in 8th grade, and then our freshman year. And I'm wondering what that access looks like.
Yep, and we intend to provide that in the follow-up report
Part
because
2?
we also like to look at successful completion, not just participation.
Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I had a kind of a piggyback off of the summer programs. Remind me the ages that the students are engaged in that particular programming.
6th grade and 7th grade.
Okay.
There's 2 different corresponding ones. So there's one for 6th graders and one for 7th graders.
Okay, that kind of cancels because my next question was, just curious around the impacts we're seeing for that particular cohort as they hit those 8th grade and 9th grade. I'm guessing that's probably something you'll share in part 2.
Yes, I mean,
Okay.
I've been pulling that data
Okay.
and looking at it, but when I pulled it in the fall,
It
it
didn't
was
really
so
sh-
small.
it didn't show
really,
much at
yeah.
that point.
So
Okay.
I'm hopeful that this summer we'll have more
Okay.
numbers to look at with
Yeah.
that for sure.
And I know this is something I've asked before, and I know we've talked about it in various places when we compare male and female students. And math is one area. I do some programming around computer science and STEM in my day job, and I know that one of the things is that just providing access, particularly for our female students, doesn't necessarily translate to engagement into upper level STEM courses. And so I guess my question just is, are we seeing discrepancies within our populations among male and female students, or are we not? Because we're really just reporting, I think, on the subgroups, but not necessarily out by gender or gender identification. And so that was just kind of a point of curiosity, and it's not anything we need to go into tonight, but Tom, I might follow up with someone just because, if that's something the board would be, or if it's data that's readily available, only because when we're talking about equity, I want to make sure that's a group that we're not ignoring, particularly
Especially
when
in
we're
math and
focusing on
science.
math, and especially when we're focusing on algebra.
Right.
So, because we want to make sure that our female students are getting the opportunities to get into those high-level math courses.
That's a
to
great
set them
question.
ahead for college.
I don't know for certain, so I don't, but I actually pulled that data just recently, and I actually pulled our data for upper level, so pre-calculus, calculus, AP Stat, for a math book club that we're doing. Don't be jealous.
Anyone wants to join?
Yes, we do meet
Sounds
third
awesome.
Wednesday of every month. And I pulled that, and I do not remember seeing a huge discrepancy across gender, more across race. But we can certainly take a look at that deeper to make sure that that's accurate. But that's what stuck in my mind more.
Yeah, and I don't mean to like drive the work and say that there's a problem if there's not, but it's just a point of curiosity because in the time I've spent on the board, I've never seen us break data down like that, and I do know, as someone in education, that we often see those discrepancies, more related to behavior, particularly in middle school between boys and girls, but often the behavior, the data that we see based on behavior often can correlate with academic, and so I just wasn't sure if we were where we were at on that, so.
Thank you for the report. I just had a couple of quick questions and maybe one observation. So I love the algebra readiness K-5, just because we know that both math and reading are such huge building blocks. And so getting that really good foundation is important. So I appreciate the focus on that. I have to admit that I was surprised to see some of the double-digit shifts that we're celebrating. Was that a surprise to you at all? And if so, to what do you attribute? I mean, those are some big shifts. To what do you attribute that?
The ELL in particular, we dug into more significantly, and we were excited and pleased. I think part of that would be we've been working through the lens of equity on access, and by access we mean our students even given the opportunity to engage with grade level content. So we can't expect them to ever reach mastery if they don't even have a foot in the door. So that has been a major priority and continues to be, and we've actually uncovered some things in middle school that we're addressing vigorously right now regarding access. The second thing to consider is that we are serving a smaller number of low language level ELs. And so by default, we would expect our ELs to perform better simply based on their language level alone. And that's just the changing demographic of who we're serving. So that certainly contributes.
There were two other double-digit celebrations, and I would say for our special education students, access would be the same. And then for our multiracial group, that's often a group with flexing and small numbers, and sometimes that percentage is reflective of a small n, and so it can sometimes shift surprisingly. Yeah.
Okay. And then I just had a real quick question on the percent of 8th grade students meeting or exceeding math map fall to winter, where we had the projected growth, the 50% norm, the 60% is closing the gap. Help me understand that a little bit more. Can you do a little deeper dive? I wasn't really quite clear about what we were saying there.
So first of all, maybe Sarah said this, but I will point out, we only included 8th grade in this because 9th grade didn't take the winter map this year. And so just to kind of streamline the assessing, so we will have more growth data in June.
Yeah.
At 50%, that is where we essentially, I understand it as we're kind of maintaining when we are hitting that 50% mark. 60% is our students are growing at a level that they're closing gaps. So when 60% of our students are meeting their growth goal, we are closing gaps in their understandings and in our numbers.
Okay.
Does that?
That helps. So when I look at the 50%, which is the norm, so that's sort of, where we would expect people to be at 8th grade, right?
It's the national norm for growth.
National norm for growth. So the national norm for what we would expect 8th graders to be doing when it comes from a growth perspective.
Correct.
Okay.
Not from a proficiency
Right.
perspective.
Yeah, I understand. It would be interesting to see what this looks like for other ages, especially for our 9th graders, and you said they didn't take it.
No, but in June, we will have that for fall to spring.
Yeah, I would just be interested in the comparison.
Right.
Because even if you look at the map data from 8th to 9th grade that we're showing here, I think it would just be an interesting comparison to understand, so my quirkiness, sorry.
No, and that's a good observation because last year at this time, the cohort of 8th graders was performing better, and so we've seen that performance follow them, and so a comparison of 8th graders on this measure would be something to look at. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then just one other quick question. So I think the other thing was, C or higher in first semester algebra 1. So tell me what a C means now.
We actually would like to advocate that we look at B and higher.
Okay.
And the reason we say that, we were just doing some data analysis, is the C across, if you look at our scales and how a C gets converted, essentially the simplest way to say it is that if a student receives a C for a course, that they've mastered foundational skills required as prerequisites for grade level expectation.
So they're just
Foundational.
basic.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
And
which is why we're saying if we're going to use this as a KPI, that would be something the board should consider, that we look at A's and B's, or overall grade distribution, so that we can look across the entire spectrum.
So I think you need to talk to Dr. Ahart because he owns the KPIs.
Okay.
Right?
If you would be recommending that, if a C means they've got mastery of foundational, what does B indicate then?
B means
Some grade level.
at least
Like
half grade
at least
level.
half of the grade level standards they've shown mastery of.
So it would be all of foundational skills plus at least, half of grade level expectation. And an A would be total mastery of grade level expectation. So the A is a very high bar, and a C we're arguing is not high enough.
Okay.
So how do we find that middle ground?
Are we using we're probably getting way in the weeds. This is proficiency scales, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And then the 3 being mastery of the standard, which we could use
So 3 is-
interchangeably.
So the 3 is the A or?
Yes.
It is.
Okay. Thank you. You were just starting to say things, and I was making other connections and wanted to make sure I'm tracking the right information.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Barron?
Really quickly, so a lot of, I think what you see going forward is predicated on the course redesign, the curriculum redesign that's going to be happening and is somewhat in place right now, but really will be happening over the next year. So given that this is a results focused board and we're trying to look forward and not backward, can you give us some context of, if possible, based on research, how long a change like that takes to really bear fruit?
That's a good question.
That actually terrifies me sometimes. Like because I want change for our students yesterday.
And we believe that you do.
But-
It's helpful for us to know what to expect and
But
have some context going forward.
I think at the middle school level, I think that I am hopeful that even just next year, with narrowing their focus on, you don't have to teach all 40 of these standards at the same level, because you can't. There's no way that you're doing those justice. Narrowing that focus on what the core has said is really important. I think we could see growth next year with middle school. Now, Algebra 1, obviously it's going to take time for those students then to get to Algebra 1.
Well, and I think one of the things that we might want to consider is what are those benchmarks along the way, so that we can say progress is being made and not wait until 9th grade to say we've improved. So what are those benchmarks in 2nd grade? What are the benchmarks in 4th grade? Or whatever we decide, to say that we're making progress toward our algebra goals by knowing we're sending more kids in ready for algebra versus just using 9th grade or even 8th grade data points. That feels a little after the fact, and will take us longer to see and celebrate progress, to be honest.
And I think another thing that we would do differently as an approach is to determine some lead measures that we can measure much more quickly than MAP or even semester grade data in terms of teacher efficacy. And Courtney's talked about how connected she is to teachers, so that we're sort of measuring the effects on the people and how they're feeling and their feelings of efficacy before we wait for just the lag measures, and try to create some correlations between our work, our on-time work for those benchmarks, and what we would see as a result in those lag measures.
Is that a non-answer for you?
I think it's a perfectly fine answer, and I appreciate the honesty. I think that as I consider my role on this board and my time on this board, this is my 6th year on this board, and maybe it's a self-criticism that's taken me 6 years to feel this way. But I am wondering when things really do change, and I am mindful of the fact that we are being coached and led in a direction to really think about where we're going, and if we're not getting there, understanding if we're doing it correctly. And I think the way that we're doing monitoring reports is helpful, because it's giving us, in the first wave, an understanding of what's happening, but then really the second report or third report, in some senses, is going to tell us if it's working or not. And so we need to really honestly have these discussions. And if you're saying, listen, I mean, the proof is going to be in how we're doing in 2nd or 3rd grade, I'm okay with that. But then that needs to change what we're monitoring to figure out if we're getting there. And that conversation needs to happen soon then, to really get there. And it's okay. I mean, if that's the nature of the solution, then that is okay, I believe. But we need to know, you want to have results yesterday, so do we, and we need to know tomorrow if that's the situation.
So this might be a good time to remind everybody that tomorrow evening we have the board and Tom have our work session with our next board coaches, and they'll be bringing back the data from the community listening sessions that were held. I also know that they're pouring over data and needs assessment data as well from the district. And that's part of the work that we are going to be doing, is setting those goals, those SMART goals. And then the next day is when staff will be determining what those KPI or goal progress measures are going to be, which should get at exactly what you're talking about, and also get at the fact that, yes, where those goal progress measures come from and where those I know we're going to be shifting language here and there between goal progress measures and KPIs, but what we know as KPIs and what student outcomes focused governance knows as goal progress measures. So I do appreciate these monitoring reports as well. They could start looking a little different though, too, and just to get into the language that we've started to use. We're talking a lot about inputs here, which that's okay, but we need just to remind everybody, just to kind of get everybody in that right mindset. This has been a lot of input talk, which has been great and wonderful for us to hear. But I think those midpoint goal progress measures are going to hopefully get at exactly what you're talking about, Rob. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I also, just to my board colleagues, I'm wondering, I started 3 years ago, and we've talked a lot about our Schools for Rigor initiatives, and we've put a considerable amount of resources and energy into this movement, and I do think that that's a huge part of our monitoring, that we don't necessarily always aren't connected through our monitoring. So I think we need to be seeing how are we doing in our Schools for Rigor compared to our other schools as well, and I think that's part of the process, but I'd like to hear your thoughts around that as well. And if so, if we have a consensus around that, then when is the place to talk about that?
I think the place to talk about that is in our work session tomorrow night when we're talking again about the goals that we have, the information that we're going to want on these monitoring reports, the type of, and then it's also going to be probably part of what Tom and his team talks about on Thursday. As well as to what, so I think those conversations are going to be very much part of what we do over the next 2 days, as far as what I'm understanding.
Is administration, are we doing it like we did our last retreat?
No, we meet with Tom and the coach tomorrow night, and then Tom and his team meet with them all morning on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're finished. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is item F4, Governance Process 1.8, Visits to Schools, and Governance Process 1.11, Governance Budget. These are policy revisions made per a discussion of policies and suggestions made during our February 5th, 2019 Board Self-Evaluation discussion. So may I have a motion and a second to approve item F4? Not everybody all at once. Yeah.
I will
Okay.
move approval.
Second, you mean?
A second, yeah.
Okay.
I didn't hear a motion.
That's all right. Ms. Langford made a motion and second by Mr. Barron. Is there any discussion about this item? We talked about it. Okay, then please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Next item on the agenda is item F5, Management Limitation 2.1, Treatment of Students Revision. This is a discussion item, which I'm going to turn over to Kirsten and the ad hoc committee that worked on these modifications to introduce.
Yeah, I want to start first off by saying that this has been something that I think Deanna and I have been talking about or formally working on probably since I joined the board or shortly thereafter, along with Natasha Newcomb, and then Dwana Bradley has stepped in and started doing some work with us since she joined us in January. And I'm very excited that we'll have a policy that we can monitor, but also I like that what we did with this policy was we created it to kind of mirror more of our treatment of parents, volunteers, owners, and treatments of staff. I think there are elements of some of those policies in here, if I'm remembering correctly. Deanna, do you have anything that you want to add, or Dwana?
I mean, I think for me, the biggest piece in terms of this policy is really looking at what we're already talking about, those measures, right? So recognizing when it comes to our equity work and our equity plan, that we have a plan for professional development, that we have a plan for where we want to see our students and our staff move in terms of this work. And I think that's reflected in terms of what, our superintendent is accountable for in this policy. And I think that the most important thing that we wanted to accomplish, so.
Does anybody have questions for the committee or comments?
Thank you. I did have just a real, first of all, thank you guys for the work on this. I appreciate it greatly. And I'm trying to better understand clause number 5. Cause or allow conditions that disengage and/or exclude students from opportunities to convey their diverse interests and needs. A, operate without promoting shared responsibility for learning and support of the education system, and operate without promoting and supporting a structure for broad student involvement in the education system. Can you help me?
I believe it reflects another section of our policy. Is that correct, Cindy?
Go ahead.
Deanna,
You know
sorry.
the answer, go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure to that piece. I know that we did look at some of the work that Cindy had provided in other pieces of policy. But when I look at this, I think about the things that we're doing in terms of our the student committee that's doing research, right? How are we involving students who typically are students of color, are students who are marginalized, are students who are not your students who are typically engaged in their learning environments, right? And are their perspectives and their views informing our superintendent about the education that their system that they're getting, or the education that they're receiving, and how we're using that to inform what's happening in the classroom, right? So we've been talking about a variety of ways that we're engaging students through surveys, through focus groups, through that work. That needs to be happening in my perspective in terms of all of these initiatives that we're talking about. If we're talking about how students are doing in math, right, and we want to engage them, well, why don't we ask students? So when I looked at that, that was my thought, that our superintendent needs to be actively and leading his team to engage our students in their education system.
Mm-hmm. And the language that they're talking about is actually already a part of Management Limitation 2.10, Community and Civic Engagement, which I believe that is language that was taken from the Iowa, in some part from the Iowa Administrators Standards.
Yeah.
But then
School
applied
leader
directly
standards.
to students.
So it relates to student and community, well, in the other section,
In the
community voice, but this is
Yeah,
this
so
is our
that's the
student
language.
lens for that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
Do you
sense?
have thoughts on changing that or editing that, or?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Where do you feel the most tension with that? Or where are you feeling the point of tension?
So I don't know that I don't disagree conceptually with what's being conveyed here. I think where I'm challenged, and this is really not my responsibility, this is the superintendent's responsibility, but what are the measures that indicate whether we are or we aren't? And shared responsibility it's a bit nebulous. I feel like I understand where you want to go. I think, though, being able to articulate and prove that it's happening is rather subjective. And I'm always challenged by things where there is a level of subjectivity that's sort of, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We sort of are, we sort of aren't, without having a point of clarity where we can definitively say this is happening. I think that's my challenge with it.
I understand that. What would it look like if this, sorry, Madam Chair, can I respond?
No, go for it.
Sorry, I'm like,
No,
do we-
this is discussion, go for it. I'm not gonna impede.
So if I get that that's really broad language that we're using in that space. My thought is student voice needs to be reflected in the education system, and we need to have pathways and avenues for which that's happening. Does that language feel clearer? Because my thought is, superintendent, you get to decide what that looks like, right? any of the aforementioned options, right? But our students, particularly our students who are often marginalized from their own education system, we need to be finding ways to engage them so that their voice is reflected in our curriculum, in our instruction, in, you know what I'm saying? And how, and so that, I think we could tighten up some of that language if you're like, that's a little too broad.
Well, and as I relook at it, when I look at the 5A, operate without promoting shared responsibility, when I look at that, if this was an I can statement I was writing for my students, right? If I was writing an I can statement for the superintendent, the key verb there is promoting. It's not the shared responsibility. So really what this would say is like, like the superintendent can promote shared responsibility for learning. So the promoting and maybe that's what's too broad, is that we're not actually, the shared responsibility isn't the outcome is promoting shared responsibility. The outcome is the promotion, and maybe that's where the language feels too broad.
But I think what you're getting to is feeling like students have a stake and a say in what's happening, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's not clear.
Exactly, yeah.
That's not
So,
clear.
so how about if that, and is number 5 the only one that there's lack of
One that
clarity?
I was a little hung up on.
Anybody else hung up on any of the rest? Because perhaps what can be done, and I don't know, this is just a thought, is some more work on that portion of it. And
Make it
to bring it back to the next meeting.
Well, and my guess is if we're getting tied up on the language here, if this does mirror language
Yeah,
in
then
our
we need to
2.0, then we
talk about
probably
the
need to
same
go
thing
back
there.
and revisit that.
Yep.
And potentially we could do those at the same time.
Maybe.
So that-
Let's just do this one for now.
Right,
Because,
But I'm
yeah.
guessing that once we get this language either shored up here, I'm guessing we're gonna have to go back and look at our
Right.
2.0 as well, because if this language mirrors that, then that language probably also isn't clear.
Yep.
Can I ask a couple of questions, clarifying questions? And I talked about this briefly with Cindy when I first saw this, but I'm not sure that operate without promoting shared responsibility for learning and support of the education system. It's clear who is intended to share the responsibility.
Sure.
You know what I mean? The other one I'm curious about under number 4, operate without a professional development plan for superintendent, chiefs, teachers, and staff around outcomes related to cultural proficiency. What would you see as culturally proficient outcomes?
What would you see as cultural? Well, Tom, I think the KPIs are on you, but I think where I've personally seen a gap, and my colleagues can give their opinion, is we talk about the training that's happening for all of our staff, right? But we haven't seen a plan that includes chiefs and yourself, right? And we even talked about in terms of
Haven't?
board. No, I haven't. I haven't heard.
But what,
about-
okay, that's a separate question to me.
Yes.
What are the outcomes that you're looking for there? That's where my curiosity is. Because I'm doing IDI, I'm doing cultural proficient training. I need to make that more explicit, apparently, in things that I've shared, but I'm not sure I understand what the board would interpret as outcomes.
Are you sure you want to have this conversation at the table? Or do we
Oh,
wanna do
no,
this in
we
a
don't
work
need to have the
session?
conversation, but that's my
That's what you
question.
want to
Yeah.
get to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Understood.
Well, and to piggyback off of that too, the conversation that Deanna, Dwana, and I had as well was that the school board shouldn't be operating without a plan for our own professional development, but that doesn't belong in this policy section, but that will be coming in a subsequent policy. So just so that we're raising that up as well, that the board wants to make sure that we, in our own governance policies, are not operating without a plan to do similar work that our staff is doing.
And I'm thinking specifically too in what we saw in terms of our equity plan that was presented, and it's been a while. It was the last one we saw was over a year ago, and I remember seeing work for teachers and staff, but it didn't really get to executive leadership. And I know you've personally mentioned at times, like, yes, this is something that we've done, but I hadn't seen a plan, and in the same way that we had for a lot of our certified staff. And so I just think, irregardless of who is in this position, you, any other board members, if we say that we value this work, then we need to have a plan for how all of us,
Oh, I have no disagreement with that whatsoever. I'm just not sure I understand.
what the outcomes are that you want.
Yeah, outcomes related to cultural proficiency. Is it- What, yeah. And I'm also not sure if this is, maybe if this is the place for that. I have no disagreement with it. I just want to understand better what you all mean.
And I think that's a good point too, that if there is something like this might not be the place, this might not be the policy for it. But I think that those are things,
Are you
so-
talking about number 4? This may not be the place for number 4, Cindy.
Right, and that's what Tom mentioned. There might be other policy areas that it would be more appropriate. I don't know, but I could think of a couple, but yeah.
Okay.
So how about, as far as next steps, April 2 agenda for another round of discussion. In the meantime, ad hoc, continue to wordsmith that. Have whatever discussion with Tom needs to happen around clarifying some of that other language.
Okay.
Would it
And
help if we provided some suggestions?
yes, and who
Yes.
wants to,
Okay.
which one of you wants, or just to the all?
I
Let's
can
not do
reply.
any, no.
Yeah.
No, one person.
Yeah, who's
One person
chairing
is going to
this?
take who's chairing this ad hoc?
Who's leading this work?
Deanna?
You want me to, or do
Kirsten?
you want to,
Okay.
Deanna? I can.
Kirsten?
Okay, suggestions will
Want
go to
to?
Kirsten.
Are you
Let's
sure?
just do it this way.
Okay.
Suggestions to Kirsten to share with the rest of the ad hoc committee. With a goal of having some modifications for the April 2 meeting to discuss.
Okay.
That make sense for everybody? Okay. Thank you, everybody. The next item is item F6, naming request at Operations Center. This is also a discussion item which I am going to turn over to Dr. Ahart to introduce.
Thank you, and thank Bill Good for putting this agenda item together. I'm requesting that the board expedite naming process for the conference training center at Dean Avenue. You've all, I think, been in there at some point or other. It's our largest conference room in the district. It gets heavy use, both from district staff and a variety of community groups. And since some of Thomas's family will be in town in a couple of weeks to take part in a memorial for Thomas, and we're going to host it there, we would like to be in a position to actually share with them that the board has approved the naming, if the board so chooses to approve the naming of the conference training center room at Dean Avenue as the Thomas Harper Conference Training Center. And so, in speaking with Cindy briefly about this right before the meeting, if the naming committee could be named this evening and make a recommendation to the board. I know the board will be meeting again in closed session for my evaluation before that time. If they could make a few minutes to go into open session to vote on this recommendation, then we could be in a position to share or not share with Thomas's family that we'll be naming that after him.
So I guess, first of all, ad hoc committee, so 3 people who are willing to do that. If Rob, Terry, and I will do that, if that's sounds all right to everybody. And then if everyone is open to having, so the March 13th, we're meeting, if we could, I think we'll begin that meeting with, well, we'll figure out the logistics of how that all has to be posted and done, and we'll just make it happen on the 13th then, and we can convene quickly before that then. Sound fair? Okay, anybody have any other questions or comments on that? Thank you for that recommendation. Yes, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Good. Okay. Next item is item F7, our board work plan. And Kirsten has taken on this item, so I will turn it over to her.
My computer's very slow at opening things tonight. Okay. So in looking at our work plan, sorry. We have some items that are complete. We're going to come back to our equity policy, though, by April 2nd. So I'm going to update that first, and I will get this resorted and sent out to everyone after our agenda planning. Our reading list, I think that we had talked, Cindy and I had talked with Matt and Tom regarding that, and I'm guessing we'll touch base on that tomorrow. Do we have any update on our city council school board joint meeting?
We do.
Okay.
We met last week, was it? And with the three representatives from the city, Mayor County, Councilman Coleman, and City Manager Scott Sanders, Terry, Tom, and myself, and got further down the road as far as determining that we would be meeting to, the purpose of the meeting would be to identify shared outcomes and shared vision around the areas of opportunity that have been identified in the city neighborhood revitalization plan, to see what we all bring to the table to help the. Terry, you've talked about this very specifically, so I'm going to turn it over to you to explain.
So as we shared at the last meeting, the city's been working for the better part of the last year to develop a neighborhood revitalization effort that's focused now on 4 sub-parts of neighborhoods. And one of the things that we talked about was ways that we might be able to leverage our joint resources to support that effort, and to look at ways that we incorporate some outcomes-driven activity, maybe focused even around United Way outcome areas, so education, income, and health, trying to embed those into how we might organize ourselves around this effort. We talked a lot about everyone wanting to participate, and so at our last meeting, we focused on ways that we might be able to engage an outside facilitator to come in and really help guide the discussion. And so we all agreed that we would advance names of facilitators for consideration. And what's that?
Or not.
Yeah, or not.
Or not.
We advanced the name, or 2 names that of individuals that have worked jointly together on a couple of different projects. Cassandra Halls from To the Top Consulting, and Scott Racker from the Robert D. and Billy Ray Center at Drake. They facilitated a number of municipal discussions, most recently the DART Governance Project that led to the reorganization of the DART Governance Board. They're also now working, after I had a chance to talk to Scott a couple of days ago, on a couple of joint efforts with Metro Waste Authority and a couple of other municipalities as well. So I think they bring great resource and expertise to this. We just got an email this afternoon from the city suggesting that we convene tomorrow to agree on the facilitators that we advanced. So we will definitely agree on the names that we advanced. And hopefully we'll be scheduled on March the 27th. The plan is to go from 5:30 to 7:30. And part of that would be presentation format, and the other would be discussion, facilitated discussion format.
Right. Yes.
And the goal for this meeting is for us to then focus, with the help of an outside third party, look at where we could focus on those 4 neighborhoods.
Correct. So where we join our assets to create opportunities for a joint project, potentially, or joint use of resources, or whatever else we decide, we want to do. I don't know that it's been specifically defined what we may end up with, but we thought that that at least was a good starting point so that we weren't just opening up the universe for discussion, but rather trying to be a little more focused around how we bring a level of focus to the discussion.
Right, yeah, so those areas also with those 3 pillars from the United Way
Right.
to frame it out, because we intersect all of those in both bodies do. And I think one of the other things that we have tried to be, to put forth with mindfulness is that we are very aware that, well, at least I have, that our bodies govern in very different fashions. So that is something that we as a school board, as the governance body that we are going to have to be mindful of as we embark in these discussions, and not, and which is why I think the facilitation is going to be super helpful, so that we're not following down rabbit holes, I guess. But
Well, and I think that the thing that's really important about that point is we both have hired administrators that are responsible for day-to-day operations. And if you'll recall, for those of us who were on the board the last time we had a joint meeting, it really was a reporting out of all of the operational things that we're doing together. And that was great, but it didn't really lead to a more informed discussion about the possibilities that we could pursue jointly if we have the opportunity to sort of center ourselves around a particular subject matter area that is really ours to own and not the city manager or the superintendent's to own.
right. And then the assumption too is that whatever comes out of this will inform next steps, next meetings,
Right.
et cetera, down the road. So it should become pretty organic from there, I hope. Any other questions on that?
So mark your calendars,
Yeah.
March 27,
Yep.
5:30.
Do we have a location yet?
Downtown library.
Thank you.
Okay. We don't have any other due dates this month, but we do have a couple that are coming up in early April, a couple different policies. It looked like Cindy and Terry, we're gonna look at 2.3, treatment of employees.
Okay.
Yep.
By April 2nd, does that still work? I know we're, okay.
Can I have a question around that?
Yeah.
What are you two looking at in terms of that? Well, let me
Said
look
that
at
there,
I'm
here's what
missing.
the work plan says. There was a discussion at December 11th meeting that perhaps policy language was an issue versus our KPIs. When monitoring report was discussed, committee will review policy to make recommendation to modify or not.
So when we at our last monitoring report regarding this, we had a lengthy discussion about is the problem with the policy, is the problem with the KPIs?
Yes.
We continually come back to this policy and the monitoring report around it, unhappy with what we get, but yet not changing what we're asking for. So this is an opportunity for, and Terry and I had volunteered to look at that policy and make recommendations perhaps about what that language could look like.
Got it. Thank you.
You got the next one, too.
There was also a external monitoring report, and I think in February, Cindy and Terry said that they would review potential areas and methods that might be in conjunction with 2.3 to review at our April 2nd board meeting. I imagine there are probably other areas that we would want external monitoring.
And I hate to push that one down the road, but I think we should push that one
Until we
down
have
the
our
road a little
goals.
bit more,
Mhm.
until we've gone through some of this process with
Right.
next board. And
In
Have
relation
had
to
an
everything or excluding
Well-
2.3?
I think 2.3 as well, because I think that's also something, and maybe I've just, that might also be something as we look at our next, at our entire monitoring calendar for next year, which we'll be doing what in the next, we approve our next year's agenda, our monitoring calendar in May or June.
Yeah, actually, unless there are changes, significant changes to the policies, I'm real close to recommending the sequence of monitoring reports, probably within the month. Which is not a
Because that's
hurry.
for, right, because it's to be effective July 1, right?
Right.
So if we can kind of talk about, maybe we can, as we know when that's coming, a little more, what date you might have that, maybe we can, is the board all right with that if we kind of shift that discussion of external monitoring to perhaps be a part of the monitoring calendar for next year
Yeah.
as we talk about that,
Well,
or no?
yeah, no, I like that idea, and actually Cindy and I chatted briefly about external monitoring
That's what I
and
was trying
tried to really think about, of all of the things that we could monitor externally, what are sort of those, hot button things that we want to focus on immediately, as opposed to trying to invent this like massive external monitoring calendar and feel
Right.
like we're totally overwhelmed by it. So are there 2 or 3 key things that we want to monitor externally that really help inform some of the more immediate work? And I think some of that may reveal itself when we're together with next board.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I think I'm missing. So we're asking if we can talk about this when as opposed to when?
I don't think we're going to have anything on April 2nd to talk about as far as a recommendation for monitoring, for external monitoring, is what I'm saying. So I would like it to come later than that, dependent on, in part, on our full monitoring calendar for 1920 and the work with next board.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're delaying this to the point where it would be ready to go for our next monitoring season.
Say that again?
I'm just making sure, so.
So we're not pushing it out more than a year. We're pushing it out a
To our
little
next
bit so that
monitoring
we can
season.
then
Yes.
figure out how it dovetails with everything
Yes,
else.
rather than, yep.
Well, and if I'm remembering when we put this on and paired it with the 2.3, it was that at that time, I thought the board had indicated that we would definitely want external monitoring around the treatment of employees policy.
Yes, I agree.
And so I'm wondering, that's why my question was, do we want to delay conversations around all external monitoring or all external monitoring except what might be related to 2.3? Is that what you were asking, Deanna?
Well, that's a thought that I had. I was going to
That's
say
a
that
thought
was
that I
my
had too,
major.
because
but-
based on the conversation we've had around the board table, it seems like if we were to start somewhere with external monitoring, it would be around 2.3.
And so, okay, I hear what you're saying now. And whatever policy revision might be proposed might actually,
Include that?
Could include
or
that,
could
or-
include that or might inform that.
So could we table
But we don't know,
external monitoring except
part
for
of it is we
2.3?
don't know what the
Right.
policy is going to look like yet, if
Right.
we're going to look, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I don't know how we can determine that until there's an approved new policy. Does that make sense? Am I over?
So essentially, you're saying the policy has to happen before we can do that work. So if
That's
we
kind
want to
of
do
what I'm
that, we
thinking.
need to have who's working on the policy.
Yeah.
So if we have a policy back for discussion on the 2nd, we'd vote later in April?
So why don't we make sure that when we're with next board, we talk about this notion of external monitoring and how it fits into the larger scheme of things relative to all of the work that we're doing around monitoring. They might be able to really help us figure out what that looks like and where we may want to focus our efforts first.
Okay.
Okay.
So the next thing we have on April 2nd was to reflect on the process we used in December of 2018 to fill a vacancy, to do a vacancy appointment. And I believe Terry sent out a reminder to anyone to do that survey if they had not. Terry, did we meet your deadline?
So I think I had 4 as of earlier today. I'll
Okay.
have to go, I haven't looked since,
Okay.
like this morning at 9 o'clock.
No,
so.
that's fine. Do you have what you need though, so that
I think
we can
so.
discuss it April 2nd?
I think so. I can bring back the results of the survey and those things that, yeah, I can definitely do that.
Is that something that goes in our work plan, or is that a separate agenda item?
The discussion of the,
So I think that likely,
That's just me
it
asking how
probably is
to-
not something that we can discuss. It might be something that we share, and it doesn't necessarily have to be at a board meeting. Because I think this is really just perfecting our process so that by the time we have to do it again,
Okay.
we at least have reflected on what went well, what didn't, and where we want to make changes.
and documenting that and probably
Right.
putting it, my thought is a lot of these processes, we need to be documenting those in board docs so that they are easily accessible
Yes,
to
please.
every board member, every staff member, because there's stuff
Phil's
that,
involved.
yeah, there's stuff that Phil's involved in that, Tom, that our board support person, and then the board members are involved with. And so having that in a space there would be great. And so
I
having
did
that-
not
yeah.
send it to Dewana,
Oh.
but it may be helpful
be
for you to
interesting to
reflect
have.
on your participation, so I will
Huh.
send it to you.
Yeah, that would be a good thing.
Okay.
Okay.
And then we have some things that are, we're going to continue to move or fail to language towards the end of the year, and then ongoingly continue with our policy discussions. Is there any other pressing board work that board members think need to be added to our work plan? It is plenty, yes. But I just thought I should, Yana?
Can I just ask where we're at in terms, I know we had, and this is affected by, where we're at with our, look for our board secretary or our new board, in that position, and how that's been impacted now that,
So you're asking where in the process we are for hiring a new? what
Yes,
are you
board sec-
asking for a
recognizing
board-
that Mr. Harper was in charge
Okay,
of
a
getting
board-
the
okay,
hiring for
board
our new
secretary.
board secretary, where are we at in that process
Board
now?
staff person?
Yes.
Yeah, Sheila and I have been in discussion. We'll be close to getting that posted in the very near future.
You're talking about the person who sits here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay. And then KPIs, community workshop for 2019 election. 2.2 is also on there, the treatment of parents, owners, and volunteers for whatever we decide to pick it up. Is it appropriate to start thinking about a deadline for that, or should we wait until we're through our next round of policy? Because we have a couple coming up.
Let's get through it.
Okay.
Let's look at that, let's think about that April too, or in April, if that's okay.
Yep.
I think we're good, and we have the next board work
Okay.
coming up as well. And just, I know Kirsten is keeping that up to date and sending it out. It's always attached on the agenda. I encourage everybody to be checking that and making sure. I think everything is noted fairly clearly on there, but if there's questions, please let her know, or let her know if there's a different, I know you asked if there's a different way that people would like to see it or what have you, but I think having that ahead of time rather than at this point in time would be great. Okay. Next on the agenda are information. Sorry.
Wait. I was trying to be patient. The forums that we had, and then the interest that we had in doing forums with students was
Yeah,
on
that's
our
on there.
work plan.
Oh, I skipped it, I'm sorry.
And Tom and I had a conversation last week. He sent me an email this morning. The idea is to have forums at each of the 5 comprehensive high schools, and at and Scavo, and then at each of the 5 comprehensive high schools to do 2 1-hour kind of work listening sessions or small group, focus group type of conversations, basically, one with middle school students from the feeder schools and one with high school students. And I don't know if the dates you sent me last week or this morning are actual dates or just hypothetical, but we're talking about potentially doing this
There
next
are actual
week.
days upon your approval that those are days that will work. Yeah.
So we could theoretically do this Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week. So, I think he's trying to figure out logistically if, with busing and everything, if we could make it all work, but, hopefully we'll get a
Looks,
quick
I think
turnaround.
I think we're good to go, as long as those will work with the board.
So then the next question, and I'll send this by email to my board colleagues, is we'll need people to sign up to moderate those, because the way that the way Tom's kind of proposed doing it, they'd be, in some cases, there'd be two running concurrent to each other, so two different buildings might have sessions at the same time, so we'll need a minimum of 2 board members for some of those time periods. And I can cover times on Tuesday and Thursday. Wednesdays that I have a commitment right now, but I'll send an email out and I'll put it in a way that allows folks to basically just put their name next to whichever one they think they can cover, so that we can make sure that these are happening, but then we'll have those hopefully done by next week.
And then is the intent to also have a staff person with the board member or just a board member?
We intend to have some staff there, just whether they play an active role or not, but just to help, help the students feel comfortable and make sure things are, if there's anything that the board member needs or whatever.
Sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you're fine.
So help me understand the format. Is it,
This is something that I've been really obviously not super capable of talking about, because I wasn't at the first ones.
We're taking the protocol that Next Board used and just truncating it a bit
oh,
and making the language where, it doesn't require many changes, but where needed to make it obviously student, that we're talking with students and not other community members.
So we'll have that PowerPoint and whatnot, and sticky notes and the whole
Yeah.
Love it.
shebang.
and who are the students that we've invited to participate?
We're
Or how
just,
do we-
we're just attempting to recruit a representative group of students from each of those areas. So it would be a group of, we're trying to keep each group to about 20 students or fewer, which will still be a very, very large sample of the total secondary population when compared with, the community members that we're met with.
And are we there as facilitators or observers? We were at the next board, we were really there more as observers,
She's a facilitator.
not to facilitate, but we're facilitating these.
Yeah, that's the idea.
She did share, because I asked her, I can't remember her name.
Lori?
Yes, I
Marcia?
believe Miss Lori. And she said, honey, any of you guys could do this. She's like, this isn't rocket science. She was like, the method is pretty laid out, and you could do this as well.
So I would just offer, as much as I liked the process, I think in a couple of instances, people struggled with exactly what the questions meant. So I think if we can be consistent in how we describe what we are asking for across all of the presentations, then I'm hoping that the information will be consistent. I mean, I participated in 2, and where we ended up in one was almost light years different than where we ended up in the other.
Sure.
And so I would maybe like to have a little bit of time for us maybe just to reflect on making sure that everybody understands what it is we're asking, and we can explain it in a way that is consistent across all of the sites.
Okay, we meet with them tomorrow, right? Something we could bring up in that way, any tips that they might have in terms of us facilitating towards the end? While they're
Are
here.
you thinking there's going to be enough time to do that before next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Is that kind of what you're wondering
I'm a little
about?
anxious about it. because I'm out of town this weekend and Monday, so I'm out of pocket for 3 days, but that's just me. If you guys tell me what I'm supposed to do, I will do it. I can follow instructions. I can read, so.
So, Rob, you're going to send out those dates to us, and then perhaps what we can do, everybody should be watching for those between now and tomorrow morning sometime.
The times are
I'd imagine,
during the
and
day.
then,
Yeah.
and then we can, and then
Late morning. to
we're
early
going to
afternoon.
need to be right on top of that email. And then we'll have an opportunity then tomorrow evening to see if we're going to be able to fill those.
Can we bring the schedule tomorrow and just fill it out so we know where we have
Right, so
gaps?
I'm gonna
Can we do
email
both?
you tonight. I'm just gonna
Okay.
forward you the dates
Yeah,
tonight, and we could certainly make sure that we're covered at all of them tomorrow night. But you'll have them within a half an hour.
And then we can, right, and then we can hash out whatever needs to be hashed out tomorrow night and make final, whatever, decisions, logistical, any whatever stuff we need. Does that make sense?
And I apologize, it fell off of the work plan somewhere, so I will.
Still in mine.
It's
that's
in there.
attached.
It's
in
in
there.
there.
It's in there. It's-
I think what it was is the Excel spreadsheet isn't working for me, and I was hoping someone would have a better suggestion, but I will work on maybe making it work better for me or something.
Well, yeah, we can also
Okay.
figure some stuff out. Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda are informational items for the board's review. G1, Clat Day on the Hill update. Deanna, do you have anything to add about that?
It was great. We hope to see you all next year.
Okay. And we also have Head Start meeting minutes. And then finally, we have items of privilege. I have nothing to report at this time, but any other things for board members to share? We do have a legislative coffee coming up on the 9th, correct?
Saturday?
At East.
At East, at 9 a.m.,
Yeah.
9 to 10:30.
and that's open
Hoping
to the
that
public.
our numbers are as good as they were at North.
Right, that was,
Great turnout of both
Well-
legislators and community members, so I have to assume that likely had something to do with the building, getting the word out too, so.
yep, I would agree. Okay, I will turn it over to Tom for his superintendent's report.
Yeah, all I wish to say is this is our last board meeting prior to spring break, so I want to thank all of our staff for hanging in there through what seems like an unusually strenuous winter, and to enjoy themselves and be safe over the break.
Okay, thank you. With that, this meeting is adjourned, and we'll hold our work session in a few minutes.